3 at the range. Hope you enjoy.
Hi Jerry, another Saturday morning we on the grind again, back at Chaga Ramos for a training session. Tell me something, how long have you been involved in law enforcement training?
Almost too long to remember. But, that's the fun of it. When you do this time and experience and the energy, it goes into one dynamic burst of output. I've been involved in law enforcement training. I joined the police service, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, on the 1st of May 1975, and that was my introduction to law enforcement training. But law enforcement firearms training is something totally different. It was a total removement, and I say removement because it's a movement, and I was removed from musketry and drill, which was the traditional concept of training adopted by law enforcement after the military style of training. But when I got involved, it would have been probably around 1978 there about when I did some research and I was looking at the other training programs that would have been available, and the one that I came upon was the FBI training program, which articulated training a little more. There was a lot more educational aspects of it, understanding firearms, how they work, when to work them, the internal, the external, and the terminal ballistic concepts. So in pursuit of that kind of education, I made contact with the NRA then and started to receive periodicals and the American Rifleman and some other magazines, some of which I still have. And then some other enthusiasts from the US would have sent me some books since 1964-65 with articles in it. And it stimulated my interest into knowing about training and knowing about shooting and not knowing about guns too much. Guns change as time changes, and they're like cars. There's a lot of boutiquing about guns, and guns enthusiasts are not necessarily training enthusiasts. And I wanted to train because I realized that it was a period in anybody's life to convert them from just handling, holding, and shooting to understanding why there was a need for defense and why there was a need for using a firearm in law enforcement as a tool. And in 1986, I got in touch with a gentleman by the name of Emmanuel Capelson out of the US. And he was very, very receptive to my discussions, and he invited me to the US. And the rest is history. I am Quantico-based trained through the Firearm Development Program. And then I became a member of IALEFI, which was not IALEFI then. It was the American version of law enforcement firearms instructors. And I, being from the Caribbean and from Trinidad and Tobago, was the first overseas member. I attended that program in 1988. I became a member in 87, and in 1988 we went to St. Augustine in Florida. And as a result of that, it catered for an amendment in their constitution, and they became IALEFI, and we formed the International Training Committee, which was steered by then one of the directors, John Meyer. And the rest is history. I mean, there are people, Mossab Ayub, John Farnham, Vicky Farnham, and so many other people.
All right, Jerry, that was your little warm up there, right? Shooting from the hip, and tell me more.
Well, it's not a warm up actually. It's an aspect that a lot of people don't get into because they've been placing the emphasis on telling their students a good shot and a good aim and good shooting is when you engage the front sight and the back sight onto your target. The statistics, however, prove different. About 70% of the time a person may acquire a firearm for defense, and I'm saying defense, meaning that they're into some kind of situation and it's life threatening and they have to defend themselves. It could be a law enforcement officer, a security officer, a civilian. What you will find is that person is going to very quickly process a thought pattern of defense. And if they have to fight, take flight, or engage, then that concept of engagement will set in. But they're losing time because time is running on the clock and their vision is picking up what is happening and the potential of what's going to happen to them. And they have to get into the instance of defending themselves with a firearm if they do. When they draw, they're not going to use all those protocols that they're being trained every day to do. They're going to get that gun out and point it in the general direction of the threat based upon proximity and time. So if you can develop some solution with respect to diminishing time and close proximity and having to defend yourself, then as quickly as that gun comes into your hand and into your sight area, I'm not saying sight picture, you're not having a picture yet. The picture you're having is of the threat. The gun is going to be secondary to that response. You can bring that gun into the scenario, and when you develop your training skills enough, when that gun is into the scenario, you can start delivering shots that could stop the threat.
All right, now last week we just mentioned quickly about grip, sight alignment, and trigger control. So in this next series here, you just go through a motion before firing and then you'll go live.
We were discussing the whole question of responding to a threat and whether it's from concealment or a uniformed officer with his duty rig. The basics still remain the same. You have to be instructed or informed by some cue, and that cue may be continuous in an argument or there may be instant. When you pick up on that cue, things are going to happen. Basically, you're going to have a response to the threat, so you're going to be looking at the direction of the threat. You're going to get your grip, your sight alignment. Yeah, as I was explaining also, there's then the demand for performance. An officer in an interview situation responding to a threat, death threat, where the perpetrator or the subject has exploded on him. That officer may have to engage if he has unarmed tactic skills and employ whatever he has, or sometimes he may have to get back and engage. Right, as you would realize, the shots were not as condensed, but they are in on your target and on your subject. And there were no sight alignment, but you had grip, you had trigger control, and that situation was in your profile of what you're defending yourself against. So in training sometimes, I teach, and a lot of instructors, we would go through the fact that one is not cast in stone, that every time a shooter is using a gun, that front sight and that back sight must come up level with your eye. You're going to lose time, you're going to lose response, and you may be shot, you may be killed, you may be stabbed, you may be choked to death or something. Firearms training is a dynamic tool in your defense mechanisms. Sometimes you may not get to use the gun. Right, we were talking about musketry and drill and traditional training and the military training. There's something that's very historic about this range that we are on, the Tucker Valley Range in Trinidad and Tobago. It's Chaguaramas. Here used to be an American base, Chaguaramas base, and it was given up back to the island sometime in the late 60s when war would have been over and the possession of the base and its facilities were handed back to Trinidad and Tobago under sovereign exchange. But there's something that a lot of people don't know, and I want to show you guys this a little bit about targets and so on. You know, this would be the 300 mark area that the Army uses for their training. So there are berms and range firing points and backstops along the way. But the interesting thing about it is this beautiful valley called Tucker Valley. This was built by the US and used and so on. The ingenuity of using historical designs. This is what they call a catapult range. You set your targets up inside here. And like in the old Roman times or so on, the functionality of this. So, interesting. You can put your target inside of this situation here. Launch it, set up your targets, load it, and send it up. The targets will rise above the backstop here. So, this is just a target board. You locate it into your system and you launch. If you want to train your shooter to shoot exposures for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, you set it up, you shoot, 3 seconds, you pull it away, it's gone. Come back up, or you can leave it in a fixed position for shooting. But the design, medieval looking, isn't it? But it works.
All right, this is what it looks like. It's going down. Send it up again. Yeah, up again. Up. Shot could be fired at that target from at this end. Down.